Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, and welcome to those who are joining us online this morning. Our lesson today is entitled Daniel's Friends Trust God. Daniel's friends trust God. Just a quick question. I know you didn't want to start your Sunday morning with a test, but I'm giving you a test anyway. Who are Daniel's friends?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
I can't hear you. Say that again, please.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
What are their Hebrew names? I told you I was going to get you with that several weeks ago, right?
Hananiah, Azariah,
And Mishael.
Mishael.
Good, good. Didn't mean to put everybody on the spot. Just trying to get everybody to wake up. But it's a good morning today, and it's a good lesson today. A common lesson about an event in the Old Testament, the captives in Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar. Our text is coming from where we left off last week, Daniel chapter 3, verses 19 through 28, with the main text being that last verse, verse 28. That verse reads, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God." Brother, will you read that in the Amplified, please?
Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants who believed in, trusted in, and relied on him. They violated the king's command and surrendered their bodies rather than serve or worship any god except their own God."
This week's lesson concludes the study we began last week into the events taking place between Nebuchadnezzar and three young men who boldly demonstrate their faith in God. And if you are without a clue of what we are discussing, you can read back at the start of the chapter 3 of the book of Daniel. You can also go back and view the lesson of our study last week. So let's begin. Let's go ahead and get into this. Verses 19 and 20 of Daniel chapter 3. Someone please read.
Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace.
Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and his facial expression changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then he gave a command that the furnace was to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. He commanded certain strong men in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire.
Now the setting is such. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has set up a golden image, and he decrees that all in his realm, that is, all in his provinces, must worship that golden image. They must fall down, bow down before or towards the direction of the golden image whenever they hear specific music being played. However, Daniel's three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, known to us as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to bow down and worship the idol. Even after Nebuchadnezzar personally explains the consequence of death for failing to bow down, failing to obey his command, They, that is the three, are unwilling to disobey God's command to worship only Him, and they proclaim their confident trust, that is faith, in God's ability to deliver them. That's in verses 1 through 18. Again, we covered this last week. These three, even in the context, even within their interaction with Nebuchadnezzar, they tell him, our God is able to do it. Even if our God doesn't deliver us, we're still not going to bow down. We're still not going to obey you over that which God has given us as His children, that is the children of Israel. And when you look back, you read back in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, the 10 Commandments, it is high up on the list. I believe it's the third and fourth commandment. Worship God and Him alone. No other God before Him. No idols. No idols. So they stand firm. Now they are young men. I think we forget this at times. We hear this over and over so often, and we forget they are young men. When I say young men, I'm not speaking 25, 26. They were possibly younger than them, still in their late teens. Nebuchadnezzar captured the promising, the best of the best, if you will, the princes, sons of princes, sons of nobles. He got them at an early age so that he could influence them. He was trying to wash out the culture of where they were and institute the culture, his culture. These three or these four, because I include Daniel in this, and when our earlier lessons, when you read Daniel chapter 1, you see that he is part of that. They stood. They understood that they were God's people. They understood that they were Israelites. But it went further. And to me, it shows there was something going on in the home. There was some instituting of God and instilling of God's word into their young minds and young hearts. And they held fast to it. Here we see these three young men, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, holding fast to that which was placed in them. That is the truth of God, God's word. And they are obedient, steadfastly obedient, placing all their trust and faith in Him. So here's where they are. Nebuchadnezzar becomes so enraged that his face is distorted, that it is indistinct, unnatural, monstrous. He is so angry. His pride has been hurt. How dare you, young upstart, stand up before me and tell me no. Bold faith oftentimes reveals and provokes God's enemies to persecution. Don't be alarmed when that comes to you. You stand for godly principle. You stand for God's word. You stand for God's wisdom, His righteousness, His holiness. You stand up in conjunction or conviction to God's holy standards. Oh, the evil one doesn't want that. And those who live and walk in the evil ways, watch them change. Even the faces change. But that's what bold faith does. Now, the depth of Nebuchadnezzar's anger is evident not only in the description of his physical features, but it is also evident in the actions that he takes. Number one, we are told he orders the furnace to be stirred up to 7 times hotter than normal. One commentator that I read said it's possible that it was a smelting furnace, and that the construction of the furnace was such that it had the opening at the top, but it also may have had vents, holes around to allow oxygen in. So whatever fuel they were using to heat that furnace up, they're adding more fuel to the fire. Hotter, hotter. The intense heat of the furnace matches Nebuchadnezzar's intense rage. Number two, he orders his mightiest soldiers, not just anybody, his mightiest soldiers to tie up the 3 young men and toss them into the furnace. He wants to make sure that there is no means for these 3 to escape. His desire is to just do away with this. He is angry. How dare you? Do you know who I am? I am not going to settle for this. You are going to be made a big example today. His judgment is against them, and it is against anyone in the future who would come up against him. Now, in that culture, it was already known that you didn't go against the king. His advisors well knew who he is and what he's about and how he is. That's the reason why they approached him in the first place with the news about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. How do you think he found out about them? Those jealous advisors. They knew who he is. They know how he is. And they knew that whatever he gave out, whatever he said, could not be overturned. So here they are. They brought it to him. He's acting on it. The onset, what we studied last week, it seemed like he didn't really want to do this. Because he addresses them, he asks them, you guys didn't do, look, I'm going to give you one more chance. When you hear it, bow down. But see, his pride took over. His pride took over, and he tells them who can deliver you, what God can deliver you out of this. That's where he messed up. And he got his feelings hurt. Because they didn't bow down, they stood up. Now, we don't even have to answer you on that. We just know that our God, he's able to do it. And even if he chooses not to do it, we're not bowing down. His pride took a blow. Before, remember, there's an audience. It wasn't a private thing. It was an audience. So those advisors were probably there. The ones that brought them to him. His soldiers are there. His pride's been injured. They stood up to him. Yeah. Unexpected deaths. Verses 21 and 22. Someone please read.
Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Then these 3 men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their turbans, and their other clothes, and were thrown into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was extremely hot, the flame of the fire killed the men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Where were they thrown?
In the midst of the fire.
Not on the outer edges, right? Where's the fire hottest? Huh?
In the center.
In the center. You look at a flame, you look at a fire. What color is the outside usually? Orange, red. When it's really hot, what color is the inside? Blue or white hot? Due to the furnace's extreme heat and the soldiers' haste to comply with Nebuchadnezzar's anger-filled command, they are burned to death as they cast Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, fully bound, fully clothed, into the fiery furnace. That is some heat. They were so afraid of the king, they've probably seen him angry before. I'm wondering if they've ever seen him that angry. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, we're not bowing down, can you see the looks of the officers? Can you see the looks in the court? It's like those of you who have siblings, and you had that one sibling that snapped back one time, that mom and or dad, once too often, and you're sitting there, it's getting hot, and you don't want to be there, but you're there because you're all together, and you sit there, and you better do it, well, I'm going to do it. He didn't. They're probably sitting there going, and when he says, tie him up, throw him in. They're nervous. They're quick to comply. They're not thinking. They do what the king says, and they're rushing up there. And all in that second, that moment, they are killed. They are burnt up. In a sense, God is protecting us. He's given a preamble, a preview of his might and power and his care and concern for his own. Those that laid hands on him, they're taken up.
Yeah.
They're consumed. Someone said, well, they were just following orders. They were following the wrong orders. They laid their hands on God's children. God wasn't going to have it.
Yeah.
In a sense, he's showing Nebuchadnezzar a preview of who he is. I am God. Your judgment was to burn up my people. I instead will burn your people. They are following me. See what I will do for them. Those that are following you, see what I will do for you, for them. The fact that these men are killed instantly. Now they're the mightiest. They are killed instantly. It tells us what? The fire is real. And it is extremely hot. It's not a fairy tale. This is serious that's going on here. The fate of the 3 young Hebrew men is sealed. Their death seems certain. Dun, dun, dun. The scene is set. How are they going to get away? How are they going to escape this? Let's move on. Let's find out. Verse 23.
And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace.
But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up.
So they were thrown where?
Into the midst of the
Into the midst. And they fell down where? In the midst. The hottest part of the furnace. They were thrown in and they fell down in. These other men, these mighty men, were burnt up. They weren't even in the furnace. They got near to it and were burnt up. Yet, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the midst of it. Doesn't say they were immediately turned to ashes. It says they were thrown and fell down, bound into the midst of the fiery furnace. Certain death. Now I'm looking at it from the outside in, literally. And I'm like, why didn't they? If you're thinking about this, wait a minute, these other men, they burned to a crisp just on that. But they got thrown in and they fell down. I mean, they're still intact. With the furnace heated to that level, the 3 Israelites' deaths should have been instantaneous, should it not? There should have been nothing but ashes left. However, they land in the middle of the flames, alive and intact, still tied with ropes. The ropes fared better than the men on the outside at this point. Nebuchadnezzar's order and the fiery furnace had no effect. Everything about this reveals that a miraculous intervention by God is going to take place. See, a small portion of that miraculous intervention by God has already taken place, in that they weren't burnt up on the outside of the furnace with these men. They were cast into the furnace. They landed in the middle of the fire. They landed and they fell down. Their ropes they're still tied. They're fully clothed. Let's see what else happens. Let's move on. Verses 24 and 25. Someone please read.
Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God.
Then Nebuchadnezzar the king looked and was astounded, and he jumped up and said to his counselors, Did we not throw 3 men who were tied up into the midst of the fire? They replied to the king, Certainly, O king. He answered, Look, I see 4 men untied, walking around in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not remain tied up long. Nebuchadnezzar witnesses them walking around inside the furnace through the flames unharmed. They're walking around inside the fiery furnace, in the middle of the flames, not on the outer edges. They're walking around inside through the flames unharmed. The ropes are gone. Wait, they were bound, but they're loose. They were bound, but they're loose. The inferno that completely consumed the ropes holding the 3 Israelite young men and instantly killed the soldiers who were near the furnace had no bodily effect upon them. Furthermore, Nebuchadnezzar sees a 4th person in the flames. Now he states that the form is like the Son of God. From his polytheistic pagan point of view, his statement is better understood as a son of the gods. See, he's a pagan. He doesn't recognize Christ. He doesn't recognize this being to be the Son of God. It's better rendered a son of the gods, plural, little g. In his pagan mind, he deems that this fourth person is a pagan being, pagan god that the Babylonians worship. Not a form representing the one true God. Thus, he is seeing a godlike figure among the flames with the Israelite men, recognizing the fourth person as supernatural and distinct from the condemned men. And when we get to verse 28, you'll see he refers to this being this figure that he sees as an angel. Now, only the one true Lord provides perfect peace in the middle of panic and trauma. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're not running around. They're walking in the middle of the flames. No matter how the king saw him, we of the house of God, the body of Christ, we believe that it was indeed the Son of God, the pre-incarnate Christ. The Lord either saves us out of troubles or he is with us in troubles. That's a Believer's Bible commentary. Their God was with them. Their God, our God, was with them. Visibly with them. Think of the fiery furnaces that maybe you've gone through, or maybe you're facing. What do you think it would do for you? What do you think it did for them to be walking in that fourth person? Maybe they didn't know. They probably didn't know it was Jesus Christ, but they knew it was from God. You knew the being was God. They knew. They're walking. I wonder if I'm sorry, my mind just racing. Were they having a conversation? What was he saying to them? What were they saying to him, if they were saying anything? But they're at peace. Walking, they're at peace. There's peace. They're in the midst of, the king is startled. He jumps up. Probably rubbing his eyes. That's why he asked, hey, wait, didn't we put 3 in, tied up? There's 4 walking around. Protection. Verses 26, 27. Someone please read.
Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fire furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head single. Neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of the fire had passed on them.
Then Nebuchadnezzar approached the door of the blazing furnace and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out of there, come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered around them and saw that in regard to these men the fire had no effect on their bodies. Their hair was not singed, their clothes were not scorched or damaged, even the smell of smoke was not on them.
Nebuchadnezzar calls the 3 to come out of the fiery furnace. He addresses them as servants of the Most High God. Most High God. This pagan king acknowledges that they are servants of a greater God than those he and his nation worships. A greater God that he attempted possibly to represent in the golden image and asked or told or commanded everyone to bow before. Greater than himself. By the expression he uses, the pagan king refers to God as the Supreme One, capital O, singular, denoting his strength and sovereignty. That is God's strength, God's sovereignty. Throughout the entire ordeal, the Israelite men were unaffected by the flames or the heat. They're unaffected. They don't smell like smoke. Their clothing is not singed. It's not tinged with ash. Their hair is probably the same style that it was when they went in. Their skin's not burnt, not tinted, nothing. They walk out as they were thrown in. Complete, whole. They came through the fire. Pure. Because they were pure when they went in. Fire is used, we're told, in the smelting process, and it might be fitting. It is possibly a smelting pot that they went through. It's fitting. Fire is used to burn out the impurities of metals. So logically, if the metal is pure when it goes in, it's going to come out pure. They weren't refined by the fire. They were already at the state where they needed to be. God protected them. He had in them that which was pure. They were obedient to their God, and it ran through them. Their faith was solidly solidified in them through and through, to the point that they were able to go through the fire and come out unharmed, unchanged. Physically. I bet, though, I would be willing to bet, to say, to stand on this statement, that they came out with a stronger faith resolve in him than what they went. Here's a strong testimony. If you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you come out with a strong testimony and a stronger will to stand for your God. They served the offices that they were appointed to by Nebuchadnezzar, and he would appoint them. When you read through, all the way through to the end of the chapter, and I'll read that verse for you after we cover verse 28 to see what the king did for them. But they held fast, held true. First and foremost, I am a child of God. I will serve in this office, but I will serve it in the perspective of a child of God. His standards I will uphold first. I will do my duty in this office, but I will not change from being a child of God. For those of us in positions, even those of us who don't have positions and titles, and wherever God has blessed us to be employed, first and foremost, we must be true to him, obedient of him. through our lives, through our performance on the job, in that capacity, we can draw others to Christ. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing firmly and obediently to God and his commands. We'll see what it did to those watching. Let's move on. Last verse, verse 28. Someone please read.
Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God.
Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants who believed in him, trusted in, and relied on him. They violated the king's command and surrendered their bodies rather than serve or worship any god except their own God.
Verse 29 says, Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. In verse 30, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar cannot deny the miracle. He can't deny it. He can't deny it. He's seen it for his own eyes, up close. Furthermore, he has a witness of more. Jewish law said that the witness of or testimony of 2 or 3 establishes the truth of a situation or a matter. Here it said what? Yeah, princes, governors, captains, king's counselors gathered together. They all saw it. So he can't deny it from himself. He can't deny what he's seen with his own eyes, and he can't counter it with any false witness because there's other witnesses. They all viewed it. Once before, the king had conceded to Daniel that surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. That's in Daniel chapter 2, verse 47. Now the idolatrous king concludes that the God of the Jews had sent an angel to deliver his servants. See, he's looking, and he's still a pagan. He's still a pagan. The closest he can get to them being delivered is not from or by God, specifically as that being a person of God. He reduces it to some object, something. He calls it an angel. But he concludes that God had sent whatever he saw to deliver his servants. He blesses the God of the Jews, and he acknowledges not only the power of God, but also his concern for his servants. Do we see that? It was by the power of God, this that he saw, whatever he saw, he doesn't know. But he assesses rightly that God sent whatever he saw. So thus it is by God's power they are delivered, and that through God delivering them, he is concerned about his servants. That he cares, he protects his servants. He's already seen that God provides his servants, for his servants. Now, whether he knew about the dietary agreement that Daniel and his friends made with the captain over the captives that we studied in chapter 1, but he recognizes God. Their God is powerful. He is all power, actually. He is all power. Nebuchadnezzar recognizes the faithfulness of the three Hebrew young men and commends them for their boldness in worshiping and serving only their God. When God uses our trials for his glory, even his enemies must acknowledge his power. God does things in such a way in our lives that even those that oppose us have to acknowledge there's something.
That's right.
There's something there, isn't there? Hey, you guys go. I'm not. If I were you, I wouldn't go up against her. I wouldn't say that to him. I wouldn't take that to them. Wait, are you scared? They have a relationship with the all-powerful. He's all-powerful. I'm not dealing with. There's nothing we can do, and I'm not putting myself in that position. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was a great victory of faith for the Jews in captivity. Remember, they're in captivity. Their courage to stand faithfully for God and face Nebuchadnezzar's fire rather than disobey and dishonor their God is a great example for us. They willingly gave their lives for God, trusting in his faithfulness to his promises, miraculous intervention, and sovereignty in the middle of horrific circumstances. And God responded with deliverance. God always knows what his children are facing, is always present with us, and is always in control. See, that's the thing we have to remember. When we're in the middle of a crisis, when we are facing things, when we are going through things, rather than let the world sink in on us and make us feel like, oh, woe is me. Don't get me wrong. We're human. We're going to experience those things. We're going to feel those things. But we are children of God. We are children of God. The hope that is in us is not the same hope that the world carries. We should always remember that God knows. He sees and he knows. Moreover, he cares. He is always present. He's right there with us. We're not going through it alone. They weren't walking around in the midst of the fiery furnace and the heat, the hottest portion of the furnace by themselves. He was with them. Yeah, sometimes it would be nice. It would be nice if it to be able to, physically look at Jesus is standing there. Okay, you're here, I hear you. But he calls us to know it in here. It's one thing to have something that's head knowledge. It's so much and so far greater to have it as heart knowledge. I was sharing with my granddaughter. She's in 6th grade and she's in an advanced math class. And some of the things about math that she's having some issues, some trouble with. And I explained to her, as I explained to my wife when we were talking about it, I had a few good teachers, math teachers. And one of the best, the greatest thing that they could say or tell me or show me to get me to understand the basics, the fundamentals of math, was in the application. It was the application when it was rooted in here. Yeah, the head knowledge is fine, but you get in those circumstances, the head knowledge is going to, because the head's going to run with emotions and you're going to be all over the place. But when you have the heart knowledge, the practical application of that relationship that you know you have with God, it makes all the difference. outwardly, anybody looking at that situation probably would have panicked. They would have turned tail and run, or they would have immediately dropped to their face. Okay, I'm bowing, I'm bowing, I'm bowing. Don't throw me in, I'm bowing. See, look, I'm bowing. But they stood firm. They stood firm. Our afflictions succeed only in accomplishing God's purposes and setting us free from the things that bind us. That's what those afflictions do. God has a purpose. That's another thing that we have to bring to our remembrance. If it's established in our heart, to bring that up, realize it, recognize it, and remember, hey, wait a minute, but God. Remember those two words I said earlier in the year? But God. But God said, these things are here to make me stronger. God said those things won't kill me. They'll build me up. God said each one leads to the other, and ultimately they lead to a steadfast hope and faith, a stronger faith in reliance in Him. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. God is still the same God who protected those three young men. Another thing to set in our hearts, to remind ourselves. He's still the same God. They were His children. We are His children. When we trust the Lord and put true faith in Him by standing firmly devoted to His word, God will provide protection, strengthening, sustaining, and growth. Y'all say that with me. Let's read that whole sentence together, starting with when we trust. 1, 2, 3. When we trust the Lord and put true faith in Him by standing firmly devoted to His word, God will provide protection, strengthening, sustaining, and growth. Furthermore, He is rightly glorified as sovereign and supreme above and beyond all persons and all things, whether they are real and or imagined. Brothers and sisters in Christ, as the time of His return draws near, let us determine to draw nearer to Him, that is to Christ, and trust in Him boldly, wholly, that is completely, fully, and faithfully. Amen. Trust in Him completely, boldly, and faithfully. Diligent determination and determined diligence. May the Lord bless you, and may He keep you this week and forever.